When we think of Egypt, we picture pyramids, the Nile, the desert. But to the people who lived there thousands of years ago, Egypt wasn't just a country, it was Kemet, the Black Land. This name reveals not only what sustained their civilization, but how they understood the world around them. In almost every culture, names carry power. They are more than labels, they are identity. In ancient Egypt, naming the land was a way of defining existence itself. A name anchored a place in memory and myth. To call the Nile Valley Kemet was to proclaim that the land's identity came from its fertile, dark soil. It wasn't the desert that defined Egypt, it was the river's gift. Glossary term, Kemet, the ancient Egyptian word for the Black Land, derived from the rich black silt deposited by the Nile's floods. This soil contrasted so strongly with the golden sands that it became central to how Egyptians saw themselves and their homeland. The Egyptians lived between two worlds, Kemet, the fertile valley, and Deshret, the barren desert. Glossary term, Deshret. This meant the Red Land. It referred to the endless desert that surrounded the Nile Valley, hot, dry, and deadly. To cross it was dangerous, filled with sandstorms, scorpions, and little water. The contrast was stark. In some places, the shift happened within a single step. Your foot could be on dark, fertile silt one moment, golden desert sand the next. To Egyptians, this duality symbolized balance. Life and death, fertility and barrenness, order and chaos. Kemet was the land of life, nurtured by the Nile. Deshret was the land of danger, a place where only the dead or the gods might wander. The name Kemet was no accident. Every year, when the Nile flooded, it left behind a rich layer of silt. This soil was dark, nearly black, and packed with nutrients. Modern soil scientists confirm that this silt came from the Ethiopian highlands, washed down the Blue Nile. It contained volcanic minerals that made it incredibly fertile. Without this soil, agriculture would have been impossible. With it, Egyptians could plant wheat, barley, flax, onions, garlic, and papyrus. It fed their people, fueled their economy, and supported monumental projects like the pyramids. Glossary term, silt. Fine particles of soil carried by rivers, especially during floods, that settle and fertilize farmland. For Egypt, silt was the difference between survival and starvation. To call themselves people of the Black Land was to root identity in the Nile Valley. Egypt was not just a place, it was a gift to the river. This is why later Greek historians like Herodotus described Egypt as the gift of the Nile. But for Egyptians, it went deeper. Their gods were tied to this land. Osiris, god of agriculture and rebirth, was believed to have taught them farming. Hapi, the flood god, embodied the Nile's annual cycle. Egyptian art often shows this contrast. Lush green fields filled with animals, lotus flowers, and papyrus, while beyond, the barren desert looms empty. By naming their land Kemet, Egyptians made clear that life and prosperity were only possible within the Nile Valley. Beyond its borders, the desert stretched endlessly, a reminder of mortality. While Kemet symbolized life, Deshret symbolized something else, chaos and danger. It was in the desert that enemies lurked, nomadic raiders, invading armies, and wild beasts. Egyptians called foreign lands beyond their valley the Red Lands. Interestingly, Deshret was also the name of the red crown of Lower Egypt. Kings wore this crown before Egypt's unification, and later, pharaohs combined it with the white crown of Upper Egypt into the double crown, symbolizing rule over both lands. So even as the desert represented danger, it also symbolized the frontier, the edge of the known world. Pharaohs who expanded into Nubia, Libya, or Sinai were conquering Deshret, bringing order to chaos. Archaeology supports this worldview. At sites like Hierakonpolis and Abydos, murals show fertile fields bursting with life. Farmers harvest wheat, fishermen cast nets, and animals graze. Just outside these painted scenes, artists depict golden sands, chaotic hunting, and foreign enemies. Even their gods reflected this duality. Seth, god of storms and chaos, was associated with the desert. He was unpredictable, destructive, the opposite of Osiris, who was tied to the fertile Nile Valley. The geography of Egypt became the canvas for their myths. Fertile Kemet nurtured, while hostile Deshret tested and threatened. Colors mattered deeply to Egyptians. Black symbolized fertility, rebirth, and the afterlife. It was not negative, it was the color of life. This is why Osiris, the god of resurrection, was often painted with green or black skin, symbolizing the fertile earth. Red, on the other hand, symbolized danger, chaos, and destruction. It was associated with fire, desert, and blood. Seth's connection to the desert is why red was his color. By naming their land Kemet, the Egyptians embraced black as the symbol of life itself. Their culture redefined what black meant, not absence, but abundance. But naming wasn't just symbolic, it was practical. Egyptians drew boundaries around Kemet. Beyond the last irrigated fields lay Deshret, where no farming was possible. This distinction guided settlement. Villages hugged the riverbanks, rarely stretching more than a few miles out. Beyond that, survival was nearly impossible without caravans and wells. It also influenced trade. Desert routes were dangerous, so the Nile was preferred. Still, caravans did cross Deshret to bring gold from Nubia or incense from Punt. But these journeys were perilous, reinforcing the desert's reputation as hostile. The afterlife was also imagined through this lens. Egyptians believed that after death, the soul traveled through trials resembling Deshret, chaotic, dangerous, filled with obstacles, before reaching the fertile fields of paradise, known as the Field of Reeds. In tomb paintings, the paradise of the afterlife looks like Kemet: green fields, rivers, harvests, endless abundance. This shows how deeply the name Kemet shaped Egyptian imagination. To live in Kemet was to live in the land of order and fertility. To die was to journey through Deshret, hoping to reach eternal Kemet in the afterlife. Glossary review. Let's pause to review key terms. Kemet, the Black Land, named for the fertile soil left by Nile floods. Deshret, the Red Land, desert that surrounded the Nile Valley, symbolizing chaos. Silt, fertile black soil carried by the Nile from Ethiopia, deposited during floods. Osiris, god of agriculture, rebirth, and the afterlife. Hapi, god of the Nile flood, bringer of abundance. Seth, god of chaos and desert storms, associated with Deshret. Field of Reeds, Egyptian paradise after death, envisioned as eternal Kemet. Today, satellite imagery confirms what ancient Egyptians knew. The line between fertile valley and desert is razor sharp. Even now, towns cluster tightly to the river. Without irrigation, Egypt's farmland ends abruptly, beyond it, endless sand. Archaeologists also note that climate change around 2200 BC weakened Nile floods, reducing silt deposits. This shift may have contributed to famine and the collapse of the Old Kingdom. For Egyptians, losing Kemet wasn't just environmental, it was existential. Their entire identity, their very name for their land, depended on the Nile's fertility. So when the ancient Egyptians called their land Kemet, they weren't just describing soil. They were proclaiming their worldview: life versus death, order versus chaos, black land versus red desert. The name carried memory, myth, and meaning. It reminded them daily of the miracle that made their civilization possible, the Nile's annual gift of fertile earth. In our next episode, we'll trace how this land, Kemet, went from many small kingdoms to one united empire under a single king, Narmer, the unifier of Egypt.